I am a non-resident fellow at the Arab Reform Initiative, and I'm convener of this event of this first conference for the program on environmental politics. Before we begin, just a note that this session is being conducted in a mix of Arabic and English. We are providing simultaneous translation in both languages. So if you would like to listen in English only or in Arabic only, you can now go to your Zoom screen, the interpretation button, and select either option. If you are happy with a mix of both and don't need translation, congratulations, you don't need to do anything else, just stay here, don't activate any function. For those of you eager to participate, to ask questions and make comments, you will be able to do so in writing throughout the event. If you are joining us on Zoom, please do so in the Q&A function on Zoom. If you are watching us live on Facebook, you are welcome to have comments on the Facebook page, and we will make sure that we get those questions to the speakers at the end. Okay, without further ado, let me say that today we have a full afternoon ahead. We are starting now with local politics of environmentalism. And exactly 2 hours from now, we will be back to another panel, which will be on environment and armed conflict and occupation. So let me introduce you to the moderator for this session, Dr. Lana Selman, who is a feminist scholar of international development. Dr. Selman holds a PhD in city and regional planning from the University of California, Berkeley. Her research focuses on local governance, and she has conducted extensive field research in Tunisia and also in Lebanon. And Dr. Selman is currently a postdoc fellow at the Belfer Center at Harvard University. She also recently published a study on waste management and municipal politics in Tunisia, which I am mentioning. She publishes a lot, but I'm mentioning this one in particular because we commissioned it here at ARI in collaboration with the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Tunis. So I encourage everybody to look that up. It's available on the ARI website. And we are also very fortunate that Lana has been helping us conceptualize the environmental politics program from this local governance angle. So thank you, Lana, for everything that you do, but especially for being here today as moderators. So all yours.
Thank you, Julia. And thank you everyone for being here. It's very exciting to be talking about the environment from below, from a local governance level. And we have an excellent panel with us today. I'm going to introduce them in the order they are on the program and give them the floor sequentially. So I'm going to start with Dr. Jihad Farah, who is a professor of architecture and urban planning at the Lebanese University. His research interests include urban fragmentation, local and municipal urban policies and politics, as well as sustainable planning. And Dr. Farah's publications and work early on when I was working on my master's research was very inspirational in Lebanon. So thank you for being with us, Jihad, and the floor is yours. So we have, sorry, just a reminder, we have 10 to 12 minutes, and at the 10-minute mark, I'm gonna remind you all that you have 2 more minutes.
Thank you, Lana. Thank you, ARI, for the invitation. I will be speaking today about I'll be speaking today about local authorities' engagement in solid waste management in Lebanon, and I'll be focusing on the challenging politics of stabilizing complex socio-technical systems. Local authorities in Lebanon have first started to be consistently confronted with environmental issues during the period of the civil war. One of these issues is that of solid waste management. Up to this point, low demography, frugal modes of consumption, and largely organic waste maintain solid waste management as a non-issue that did not concern much local authorities. Even larger cities were content to dump their limited waste quantities in empty lots in the peripheries. This changed in the Civil War period with the urbanization spreading in many areas. So maybe I will just put this way, yeah. You still seeing?
Yeah.
Okay. So I was saying this change in civil war period with urbanization spreading in many regions and the destruction waste becoming a major problem to be dealt with. This is how the huge waste mountains of Burj Hammoud and Normandy in Beirut area and that of Saida started to take place. After the civil war, even greater urbanization and changes in modes of consumption set the issue of solid waste as a top priority of local authorities' concerns. In the post-war period, solid waste management became, for the first time, an object of central institutions' policies, especially for the areas of Beirut and Mount Lebanon. The Council of Development and Reconstruction, with the support of the World Bank, pushed for the establishment of large solid waste management facilities as the recycling and composting center in Karantina and the incinerator in Amrosiye. The latter was particularly the object of controversy and mobilization by local communities fearing its fumes and was even eventually burned down by an angry mob. It is in this context that local authorities in Beirut and Mount Lebanon were dispossessed of their solid waste management responsibility, and the contract was awarded to a private company, Suclean, close to the Prime Minister, to collect, treat, and dispose of municipal solid waste. The contract was paid by local authorities through the Independent Municipal Fund, which is a mechanism that mandates central authorities to gather some municipal taxes and fees, like phone bills, for example, and redistribute them to local authorities. Hence, after being a major blight in Beirut in the civil war period, Suclean managed to black box solid waste management, rendering it invisible, and that by arranging a huge sanitary landfill in Ne'ameh in the far periphery in Beirut agglomeration to receive practically half of Lebanon's waste for 20 years. This very lucrative contract was, however, also a major source of complaint by local authorities as it swallowed considerable portions of their budgets. The waste crisis that followed the closing of the Ne'ameh landfill after it was oversaturated in 2015 has led to a spectacular opening of the solid waste management black box. Images of piles and rivers of waste from Beirut circulated the globe. It also led to the largest mobilizations in Lebanon's recent history. Up to then, deficiency in solid waste management was associated to corruption and to spoliation through post-war neoliberal policies to the benefit of Lebanon's sectarian system overlords. However, the citizen mobilization faltered due to internal schism and the capacity of sectarian political actors to regain the upper hand by dismissing Suclean and calling for new tender bids on one hand, but also by recognizing a larger role for local authorities that wish to engage in solid waste management on the other. Many local authorities in Beirut and Mount Lebanon areas hence joined those outside this area that were tinkering solutions to deal with solid waste management for some time then. And one could notice the rapid growth in the number of local authorities that came to engage in one way or the other in solid waste management. While much of this engagement took the form of local authorities in organizing the collection of recyclables and selling them to specialized recycling networks, more than 50 engaged in setting solid waste management treatment and disposal facilities, including secondary sorting, recycling, composting units, waste to energy, and landfilling. This was greatly helped by international development and humanitarian funding, as solid waste management was regarded by humanitarian agencies as key issue for social stability in Lebanon. However, beyond funding opportunity, one must recognize that what pushed many local authorities to engage in solid waste management is a belief that their success would enhance their legitimacy as a capable administrators and representatives of the population in the face of their marginalization by now contested and deficient central authorities. In the research that I have conducted with Eric Verday since 2017, we were particularly interested in the dynamics linking local authorities' governance and solid waste management in Lebanon. For that, we adopted a sociology of public instruments analysis approach. Hence, we looked into instruments central to solid waste management by local authorities in Lebanon, like solid waste collection and treatment contracts and relations to the private sector, financial mechanisms, modes of public engagement, land use policies, and the definition of solid waste collection perimeters for nearly 50 local authorities that were involved in setting solid waste management, treatment, and/or disposal facilities. Then we analyzed how different assemblages of these instruments have impact in different local authority settings on build-up of the legitimacy of these local authorities, governances, on the emergence of new spaces of complementarity and cooperation at the local and regional levels, and on the relation with central authorities. The examples of Zahle, Saida, and Bikfaya, in the ways they address solid waste management, are particularly interesting in this regard. In fact, they represent different types of governance and technological choices. I'll start by Zahle. The municipality of Zahle, a large city in the rural Bekaa area, has been dominated by the personality of its mayor, who presents himself as a technocrat and distances himself of partisan politics. Being outside Beirut and Mount Lebanon, Zahle had to face early the issue of solid waste management. When elected in 1998, the mayor and his council pushed for solving this challenge by buying a large land in the far periphery, setting a recycling and composting facility, as well as a sanitary landfill, and closing the old dumpster. This was largely possible due to financial support of international organizations and close oversight of the private contractor operating the facilities. The main feat, however, is that the municipality was able to cut down on costs, allowing for many poorer municipalities in an area socially and politically fragmented along sectarian and partisan lines to use the same landfill. While in other areas, NIMBY attitudes towards solid waste management was a source of communitarian and political tensions. However, with the saturation of the landfill expected in 2024, there is a major concern related to the sustainability of this solution. The case of Saida, a coastal city in South Lebanon, also outside Beirut and Mount Lebanon, represents a quite different situation. Here, we have a municipality leadership strongly affiliated to the Hariri family's political and business networks. The solid waste management solution was hence central to their municipal campaign, included the dismantlement of Saida's waste mountain and its transformation into a park, as well as the establishment of a $40 million recycling, composting, and waste-to-energy plant in a PPP associating the municipality to a local business tycoon affiliated to the Hariri clan. With the support of Saudi funding, the municipality managed to do what it promised. However, serious challenges faced the plant's operation. First, with the incapacity to generate grade A compost, the financial model of the plant was challenged. Hence, the initial promise of the investors to take all Saida's and its surroundings waste and treat it for free was dropped, and $90 per ton fee was requested for entering waste. It also meant that it had to bring more waste from other areas. Second, with the absence of a landfill and with the closing of an industrial plant in the Bekaa that used to take the refuse waste accumulated again near the plant. This provoked nuisances and orders, controversy, and finally manifestations to close the plant. Bikfaya, on the other hand, engaged in solid waste management in the context of the waste crisis in 2015. Before that, it was under Sekleen. In this mid-mountain Matan town, stronghold of the Kataib party, waste was accumulating in the street. Local militants, mostly associated with the party, began to develop a recycling solution to minimize waste. This is based on the creation of an improvised recycling plant and a sorting from source campaign. In 2016, the leader of this movement became mayor and aimed to include other municipalities in the area in the operation. In fact, the Kataib party wanted to use this solid waste management as a showcase for their advocacy for more decentralization on one hand, and to expand their power base in the larger Matan area on the other hand. As it lacked a landfill, the municipality wanted to move towards a new generation incinerator for the refuse material and expand its operation to include 15 municipalities. However, its shaky finances, depending on the independent municipal fund and its irregular transfers, did not allow for this project to develop. Nevertheless, recently, more municipalities in the area are sending their recyclables to the Kifaya plant. One can see in the three cases the complex interlinkages between municipal solid waste management and municipal governance in Lebanon today. Moreover, while the path of local engagement in solid waste management might be alluring for local authorities and governances aiming to assert the legitimacy and power base, it is clear that it is a risky, complex path. Solid waste management technologies are complex and difficult to stabilize. Hence, beyond microsystems at the level of villages, they require building geographical and institutional assemblages that are being able to regulate their relations through funding mechanisms, reliable contracts, operational flexibility, smart land use policy, and strong managerial oversight. Nevertheless, and despite the fact that no really sustainable solution has been successfully developed at the local level in Lebanon today, more and more local authorities are choosing to move in this direction. It seems that for many municipal entrepreneurs, the promise of empowerment through solid waste management still overcomes the cost of inertia on their image when waste accumulates in the street or is burned on the hills or dropped in valleys and rivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Jihad, and thank you for keeping time also. Our next speaker is Dr. Intissar Kherigi, and I'm going to introduce her very quickly. Dr. Kherigi holds a PhD in comparative political sociology from Sciences Po Paris. Her research interests include decentralization and local governance, urban marginalization, and democratic politics. Dr. Kherigi is also co-founder of the Jasmine Foundation. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Lana. I'm going to share a PowerPoint. So let me just share my screen with everybody. I think this should work. Just one second. Zoom is still a bit of a mystery to me, so hang on. Can you see anything? No? Not yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, let me just try to figure this out. Okay. It's telling me I should change my preferences. I'm not sure why that's happening, but okay. Let me just check my system preferences. I'm not sure if I.
Okay, and Sarah, and also if you need tech support, you can chat with the Arab Reform and the person who says Arab Reform Initiative, who's
Okay.
Andrew, who can provide some tech support.
Okay, great. Okay, Lana, do you want to skip to somebody else so we don't waste time? And I'm just going to change my settings. Yeah. You're on mute.
I'll skip to someone else, but you can also email your presentation to Andrew, and he can set it up for you. Okay.
Great.
So I'm going to move to our next speaker, Dr. Chiara Loschi, who holds a PhD in political science and international relations from the University of Turin in Italy. Her research focuses on democratization and decentralization in the Arab world, with a focus on Tunisia and Libya. Dr. Loschi is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Bologna. The floor is yours, Chiara.
Thank you, Lana. And thank you, the Arab Reform Initiative, for this excellent occasion and opportunity. Yes, indeed, I did my PhD on local solid waste management in Tunisia. And that's what I will be talking about. So I spent some time in Tunisia, starting from 2013 to 2015 for this research. And I was working on the huge theoretical question on what 2011 Arab upheavals can tell us about actual democratization and authoritarian upgrading processes, and how actually scholarship can redefine the tools for researching political processes, democratization, and so on in the Arab world. And right after I arrived in Tunis in October 2013, I realized that actually the issue of environment was on the top of the agenda. And I decided to work on municipalities, local governance, and the issue of solid waste management before the revolution, because I think that it is a perfect entry point to understand local politics. And I think that what came after the revolution is confirming that it's a really interesting topic. At least in Tunisia, it was a topic to discover. And after the thesis, I also published an article on Social Movement Studies journal on the issue of riots in Djerba, covering the period of 2014-15. So the first issue of decentralization, the independent Tunisian Republic has structured a number of legal provisions and judicial frame for municipalities in the bulk of laws date back to 1975. And at that time, decentralization was not really going on. It was a form of deconcentration from the French administration, déconcentration, which means that the structure of local power was strictly controlled by governors, which were appointed by the Ministry of Interior, and municipalities were indeed a kind of marginal body on the local level, delivering birth certificates, red tape, and bureaucratic work. And it was formally charged with collecting domestic waste, at least on the territory that they were administrating. And indeed, there was a tax called, everyone knows in Tunisia, of course, the Zibla wa Kharuba tax. And at that time, there was, I realized that international donors supporting these years and the first liberalization reforms in Tunisia were focusing on urban planning, urban infrastructure, and not really working on the issue of decentralization as we know today. So that the municipalities had a marginal role, at least if we look at them by the eyes of today. And the delegation, and then the law of the ANGED, the Agence Nationale Gestion des Déchets, the National Agency for Solid Waste Management, and it was established in 2005. And we know now in the case between Naples Italian firm, and Tunisian SUS, and the ANGED was one of the main stakeholders involved in this corruption case. The interesting point is the municipal development programs that the World Bank has been supporting in collaboration with the Ben Ali regime, supported between 1992 to 2014. The last one was closed really late. The aim was to reform local governance, municipalities, and reinforcing local authorities, and redefine state control from below. In my research, I say that this is a kind of failure, as this is a contradiction. While on one side, the World Bank programs were trying to reinforce and the participation of private actors, private firms to manage solid waste management in collaboration with municipalities, opening competitions, and reducing non-democratic governance from below. This wasn't the case, as the Ben Ali regime could control private actors, trade unions. The machine was working, but what happens with the 2011 and the environmental riots that emerged after, it is quite evident that it's a contradiction even from the perspective of authoritarian upgrading, so that around the issue of the environmental reforms and issues, and there is something that we should grasp and analyze. And so what is happening after 2011? The environment became and still is consistently one of the main topics on the political agenda and of the civil society organizations, NGOs that came up and emerged and developed in Tunisia after 2011. Indeed, we see that there is a number of civil society organizations and the movement and the riots around the main landfill and the other landfill. The main landfill, which is in Borshakir, in a really low income neighborhood, whose inhabitants were kind of repressed, their protests were repressed before 2011. Now they are quite visible. You can Google the issue, you can find a lot of news, and consistently, what I want to stress is that consistently the issue is on top of the agenda and on the mobilizations, which is extremely important and kind of new for Tunisia. And I really agree with what Lana actually wrote in the paper that has been mentioned in the introduction, the paper that is available on the website on the environmentalism in Tunisia. Before the revolution, environmental protection was a personal moral responsibility rather than a societal, political, economy question related to patterns of consumption. And this is something that is still, I think, visible, while at the same time different topics are emerging. But in order to see the switch from this issue to something more consistent from civil society to national institutions, a lot of work must be done, in my opinion. And the case of the corruption that emerged in November and December with the changing in the head of the ANGE, the Ministry of Environment, is confirming that not everything has changed after 2011. And even this replacement can be just an occasional temporary solution. And what is lacking, in my opinion, is the dimension, what is weak so far is the dimension of environmental justice, which is something to build not only by population, civil society organization, NGOs, which is really good, but in a continuing chain of dialogue and transmission of content and mobilization between population and, I'm going through the conclusion, to the top level of representative. And we see a multi-level governance somehow of environmental domain, but it's still really confused, and the risk is that it's like a temporary solution and measure, but the less than clear history of the institution of ANGE, as Lana writes correctly, it is still testifying that the main core of control and management has to change. And in this time of political crisis, the risk is to see incumbents taking action on environmental issues, but really on the top and not on creating accountability and external control, check and balances, and independent monitoring. And this is a sharing of all the research and thoughts. And thank you, Lana, for your coordination.
Thank you, Chiara. Intissar, is your presentation okay? Did we take care of that?
Yeah, it seems to be okay now. So I think I should.
Yes, so the floor is yours.
Great. It actually worked really well because Chiara already gave a great introduction to the solid waste management field in Tunisia. So that's what I'll be talking about now, but more from the perspective of the local activism that has been taking place in and around the landfill of Sidi Hsine, which
did you start the presentation? Because we only see your computer screen. Did you actually start the PowerPoint?
Can you see it now?
We only see a screen with like these really nice colors, blue and stuff, blue and pink and stuff.
Okay, hang on. Okay. Somehow my computer has become very concerned about security, so it's suddenly put all these security things. I don't know what's going on. Otherwise, I think Andrew has the presentation. If you wouldn't mind sharing it, Andrew. I sent it to him just in case.
Okay.
So that works well. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, great. Okay.
Much more efficient than I am. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the solid waste management issue as well in Tunisia, but looking more from the perspective of the local activism that's been happening. So Chiara already provided a really great overview. And I wanted to, so if we move to the next slide, I think it's really important to situate the environmental question within how the environment has traditionally been spoken about in Tunisia's history. So if we move to the next slide. So to situate it within sort of history of political institutions in Tunisia and how the environment has been talked about, the environment really has been very narrowly discussed and defined under the former regime before 2011. So as you probably know, the political institutions were characterized by the very strong fusion between the ruling party and the state prior to 2011. And the question of the environment was used very much to window dress the regime and as a way of capturing really international funds. And so we see that a lot of sustainable development strategies and a lot of environmental institutions or the institutions responsible for the environment were created in the late 1990s and the 2000s in response to a global push for these kinds of responses. At the same time, the notion of environment was very much restricted and limited to the idea of cleanliness and hygiene. So environment apolitical issues, such as improving the attractiveness of the city, Jamaliyat al-Medina, or taking care of public hygiene. And I have a quote here from Ben Ali from 1992 when he was inaugurating the first annual forum of the neighborhood committees, which were comités de quartier, which were these kind of facade organizations to really sort of bring even more information on the local level up to the state, into state institutions, and also to sort of manage local populations. And one of their main issues was focusing on the environment. But of course, the environmental issues were defined as being about, as you can see in the quote, cleanliness, hygiene, and the aesthetic of our towns and neighborhoods. And so we see these different definitions of what constitutes the environment and what environmental issues are. And this came out also in the implementation of Agenda 21, which was a global agenda on the environment and sustainable development, but which in Tunisia was implemented very much within this very limited definition of the environment as being about hygiene and aesthetics and not much else. So if we move to the next slide, when we see after 2011, as Chiara mentioned, we see that numerous campaigns emerged that really stretch the definition of what constitutes the environmental. And so we see that the environmental begins to come out as a transversal theme, actually, in many different types of claims that were made. And so we see the waste collection issue, which is mentioned by Chiara and in your paper, Lana. At the same time, we also see the environmental arising in lots of different socioeconomic claims in terms of the deprivation of socioeconomic rights and also the discrimination against particular territories. And so we see, for example, local campaigns that emerged in Geddes, the Gulf of Geddes, which were targeted at a large chemical plant owned by the state, but actually much of it managed by subcontractors at the same time. And you see the local residents really organizing around very long-standing grievances that have been there for decades and decades. And so you see also local mobilization happening in Gafsa against the same company, actually, the Groupe Chimique Tunisien, using a variety of different tools like strikes, protests, shutting down production, and demands also for the state to respect its own laws and to respect international norms. And what we see with these environmental claims is that they relate to environmental harm. So looking at, what is the effect on marine life, what is the effect on air pollution, what is the effect on residents, but it's also very much connected to demands for socioeconomic rights, that this environmental harm is directly having an impact on the livelihoods of people in the local areas, on local farming, on local fishing, on tourism, and also linking it very much to the rights of the workers themselves in these industries who don't have adequate protection against the pollution that's happening and the kind of working conditions they're in. And it's also environmental issues are very much linked to territorial inequalities. And so there is a complex interplay between territorial discrimination that has been happening for decades, and also the question of environmental justice. And so we see within the realm of environmental justice also demands for special funds, special development funds for the affected regions in question. And also these environmental claims are often linked to constitutional rights. So linking it very much to the right to a healthy and balanced environment in the Tunisian constitution, and occasionally also framed in the language of the international and universal right to live in a healthy environment. So if we move to the next slide, I wanted to take a look at a very specific case study, which is the Sakram sub-campaign, which began in 2019 in Sidi Hsine, which is a municipality in Greater Tunis. And this campaign was focused primarily on shutting down a waste landfill site, which Chiara mentioned, the Burshakir landfill, which has actually exceeded its use by date, or its legal duration, by around 12 years. And so the site is actually operating illegally. And if we move to the next slide, I actually conducted fieldwork in this area in 2019, when the campaign first began, and again in 2021. And what's very interesting about this campaign is that, first of all, it's the biggest landfill in Tunisia. So it actually receives the waste from all of the 38 municipalities of the Greater Tunis regions, which is around 3,500 tons per day. And secondly, also it illustrates the nexus between the local, the national, and the global. And this is what makes this is what makes it particularly a complex issue. So as I think Chiara mentioned very briefly, the site has been exploited by foreign companies for a number of years. So since it started, first of all, with a French company called Bizorno, which was politically connected to a former French minister who received undue advantage due to his relationship with Ben Ali. Then it moved to a Tunisian-Italian company, which itself is being investigated for corruption in Italy. And it also raises the question of the nexus between these different networks, with the ONGED, which is the National Agency for Management of Waste, with the ONGED itself being actually very much implicated within these networks, and riddled with corruption itself. And so there is a very complex political economy, which has itself been an obstacle for local activists, because any organization or any sort of movement that came to take on this issue was actually put off by the fact that there were very influential and powerful economic interests that were involved, going all the way up to the global level. And so here we can see the quote that those who wanted to work on it found it too difficult. And often it was quite difficult to really get started on a campaign because of the threats that were involved from the local companies, and at the same time from the complexity of the issue. So if we move to the next slide, what was interesting I found in this experience in Sidi Hsine with the Sakram sub-campaign is that you had the coming together of different forms of mobilization and different types of actors. So on one hand, you had local activists who were actually using a method called community organizing, which is imported from elsewhere, from the US. And they were working primarily with a French organization. But at the same time, they worked very closely with the municipal councillors, with a number of municipal councillors who were interested in the issue and who took it up. And I think what's interesting about this is that you have a sort of building of local movements that are receiving international donor funding. So this organization, this local association, was drawing on an international methodology and international donor funding, but at the same time, very much focused on building local networks and building local community power by cultivating local leadership and building a movement over a number of years. And so the association was led by young people, all of them in their 20s, who were working on a number of issues that built trust in the community before they actually tackled the issue of waste collection. And this kind of created a large social base on which they could draw by the time they actually reached the issue of tackling the closing of the landfill. And we see, I mean, I don't have time to go into it, but their model is very much drawing on, sort of confrontational approach towards the government and towards the state, which moves away from this kind of NGOization that we see in a lot of civil society projects in Tunisia. And at the same time, they use social media quite effectively. And they emphasize this themselves to really raise this from being a local issue into a national level issue. And so this model contrasts very strongly with the kind of state-approved regimes of citizen participation that we've seen at the local level, and which seek to sort of enforce a consensus, whereas the model they used was very much oppositional and confrontational.
Thanks, Intissar. Can you just wrap up so that we have 2 more panels to give them the time? Thank you.
Okay, all right. So I'll conclude if we move to the final slide. And so actually this campaign led to a success in terms of actually forcing the government to declare that it would close the landfill site down within 2 years. And so that's by the end of this year. And I think that the example is very interesting, the case study, because it first of all, it shows the nexus between the environmental and the issues of governance and corruption, which are very much an obstacle, I think, to local activism in a lot of countries, but which at the same time give an impetus, a special sort of impetus to environmental activism because of the presence of grievances surrounding unfair advantages being given to foreign companies, the idea of lack of national sovereignty around issues to do with environment and waste management, and also grievances around corruption. And at the same time, it also shows the redefinition of what is environmental. And the environment has really emerged as a kind of transversal topic that touches on socioeconomic rights and demands, and also the issue of what kind of developmental model and economic model the country, people within the country would like to see. And so it also shows how the local is becoming an arena, an important arena for citizens to exercise their political agency and to create new forms of mobilization around environmental issues. And you can see in the quote there, and I'll end with that, is that these local forms of activism are challenging the existing pattern of state-society relations and rejecting imposed solutions and really challenging the state to come up with policies that are acceptable to local residents and to citizens. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Intissar. Our next speaker is Khalid Suleimani, who's a journalist specialized in climate change and environmental politics. He's the author of Water Guards, Drought and Climate Change in Iraq, and is a contributor to several regional and international media outlets, and is engaged in what he calls solution journalism. The floor is yours, Khalid.
شكرا لنا وشكرا لجميع الزملاء والزميلات.
Thank you, Lana. I would like to thank all of my colleagues. I just wanted to add that in addition to being a journalist, I'm working on the various questions and causes discussed by the speakers in the MENA region. I work as well with journalists from Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and all of these MENA regions as part of a project called Media Lab, which is a project by the French agency to develop the media. I will not read the research paper that I wrote because I'm a journalist and I prefer to tell a story. I prefer to convey the local feelings to the recipient. So I will be brief and I will mention a number of solutions and initiatives based on the stories that I have seen and witnessed and investigated and read. This topic is linked to Iraq because this book is about Iraq, so my examples are from Iraq. There is a problem. I will start by this and let us move away from closed halls and conference rooms and these beautiful rhetorics. When we talk about global warming and climate change, when we write an article published by New York Times or the French journal Le Monde, these articles will be read by a minority of readers, but we need that the local population be aware of what is happening in reality. When I asked the question, which is the topic of my research paper, when I asked Iraqi citizens if they know anything about climate change, they said no. I told them that if icebergs melt, do you know what will happen to Iraq? They answered in their Iraqi accent, what are you talking about? Why do I care about icebergs and the northern regions? So I thought this is a question that I should investigate. People do not know what will happen. Do you know why? Because the number of environmental issues related to climate change and the mismanagement of resources is restricted to less than 1% in the Arab media. This is a disaster. We talk 100 languages, but we cannot or do not know how to address the local population. So I told my interlocutor, my Iraqi interlocutor, I told him that if they melt, the sea level will rise, and the Basra, the city, the most important city of Iraq, will drown. So this person told me, are you serious? I told him, yes, I'm talking about something that will happen in 30 or 40 years. So this is the problematic that we should discuss. Till now, local populations are unaware of what is going on. And even if we manage to reduce climate change repercussions till 2050, and if we reach 0%, however, temperature will rise by 1.5 degrees. Thus, we are living in the region, and the MENA region, and the Middle East and North Africa. We have large regions that are desertic or that lack water, agriculture, trees, and the local populations do not know what to do, how to act, how to confront these environmental crises. The percentage of, or the demographic percentage in this region is still one of the highest. Iraq, for instance, today in Iraq, we have 38 million Iraqis. In 2050, scientific estimates of the Iraqi Ministry of Planning says that Iraq will have 80 million Iraqis, and we are witnessing today. Nowadays, we are witnessing a great problem and issue related to water resources with Turkey and Iran. These two countries are building dams, huge dams, and they are restricting access to water. Uh, Meanwhile, the number of the Iraqi population is increasing, and we have a mismanagement of water resources in Iraq. The local population is still unaware of these problems, and Iraqi families have 10 to 15 children. I'm being honest, I'm not exaggerating. I have met families during the research I conducted for this book. I have met families in southern Iraq with 15 children, who had 15 children. These children do not have access to education. So what are the means? What are the tools? What can we do? This is the question. How can we confront this problem? What are the solutions? I would launch a number of initiatives, and I would hope that the Arab Reform Initiative would actually consider these initiatives. I believe that we should support written media or written media outlets in Arabic to raise awareness, to teach people how to adapt to the current reality. This is first. Second, how can these people confront and reduce the negative repercussions of these issues? Why? Because in Iraq, for instance, nowadays, we have rising migration. People are leaving their regions and moving to other regions. This will lead to new local conflicts. In Basra, in the south, people say, or we know that people are leaving their houses. Why? A journalist from Morocco and another one from Egypt asked me, what do you mean by the problem? What are the people in Basra facing? Some of these terms that are used to discuss climate change are known in English, in French, and the other languages, but we do not understand them in Arabic because we have lower river levels. We are seeing that sea levels are rising and the local lands are having higher levels of salt. Basra used to be known as the paradise. In the previous eras, it used to be called the paradise of gardens. Today, Basra lost 90% of its agricultural lands because of rising levels of salt and because of the rising temperatures. When people leave these regions and they move to other better regions, this migration will cause new conflicts that we should avoid at all costs. So we should pay attention in our Arabic media outlets, Arabic speaking media outlets, and also encourage Arab journalists writing in Arabic. Khalid, you still have 2 minutes. Another initiative, we should teach local communities, we should teach adults. This is also one of the UNESCO program initiatives. We should as well discuss environment-related topics and climate change issues in educational curricula so that the new generations are taught how to confront this dire situation and this crisis. We ought to teach individuals how to manage water resources and trees. We should raise the awareness of local communities. Why? Because these people know how to deal with water resources. In Lebanon, for instance, water resources, underground water resources are being exploited to the end. And sometimes this is done consciously or because people do not know the repercussions of that. Local communities should know that if they exploit all of this underground water, what can they do next? They have to take into consideration the future. So I call upon all of the participants and colleagues to see how people are living. Thank you.
شكرا لك خالد وشكرا على هالدعوة اللي كتير
Thank you,
مهمة.
Khalid, for this call, for this invitation that we will discuss later on in the Q&A section at the end of this session.
Is Dr. Noura Wahbi, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Public Policy and Administration at the American University in Cairo. Her research interests include the urban commons, governance, informality, water, and political economy. Thank you for being with us, Noura. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lana, and thank you, Ari, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be, part of such an initiative where we can have these trans-regional conversations, which I think are very generative. And I think there's already been quite a few common threads that resonate with my research in Egypt. But the perspective that I would really want to focus on is looking at these questions of local environment through the lens of urban political ecology and specifically on urban waterscapes. And inspired by the questions that were shared with this panel, I want to focus on two conceptual claims. So first on this idea of the production of scarcity and how we see it enacted at the local level. And second, how we can expand our definition of what grassroots environmental movements are and what they do. So as a general context, the MENA region is one of the fastest urbanizing regions globally. Egypt in particular has had a long history of migrant movements to the cities, which has recently abated. But today, the building of the deserts has expanded metropolises like Cairo beyond the traditional confinements of the city limits to encroach and capture nearby deserts and agricultural lands. And this has meant that the urban has become one form of the production of the environment and the production of nature, which is grounded in some of the theoretical work developed by Neil Smith. So for me, I see urbanization as this socio-spatial process of the morphing of nature itself. And it's continuously being produced by shifting alliances of social relations within society. And because these processes are dependent on the social, and for many countries of our region, specifically the state, unevenness is the sure outcome of this type of development due to the frequent choices of the state to side with powerful actors, like we've been hearing from the others, like global capital and certain class alliances. And this unevenness appears in both the process of urban development and in the production of nature itself. And as these processes of production become more sophisticated, so the financialization of the common good, these processes require the creation of new markets, such as for land and for utilities. And in turn, these markets require scarcity to function. And if scarcity doesn't exist, then it must be socially created, which is what I kind of depend on the work of Harvey and Eric Swingadel. So in the case of Egypt, this construction of scarcity in the utility sectors, in the water sector in particular, has been prompted by international donors, like many of the countries in the region, who really promote these programs for the commodification of resources. So under Mubarak in Egypt, for instance, in the early 2000s, there was the corporatization of water companies in the different provinces and governorates in Egypt. And it was an initiative pushed forward by USAID and the World Bank. So it's not full privatization like in some of the other countries, but for the first time, there was a move towards the standardization of the pricing of water itself and formalizing distribution in all off-grid areas. whether they're marginalized communities or informal areas. So these markets really help create this constructed resource scarcity, and states and different types of institutions became implicated in these strategies of accumulation by dispossession, which our colleague Hamza yesterday brought up in one of the panels. So some of these recent forms of economic growth and neoliberal strategies are predicated on this type of accumulation that centers on privatization, financialization, and in Cairo's case, this very fierce corporatization of water and other utilities. So to get to the more concrete local examples of how this type of scarcity was enacted, in the distribution of water in such a vast city like Cairo, there was a conscious attempt by the local government to prioritize certain water demands for elite communities and specifically satellite cities on the periphery of the city that were being built on desert land, rather than the supply of over 1,000 informal settlements and areas within kind of the city center. And these informal settlements house most of the lower income sectors of society. So for instance, to establish infrastructure and to bring in different types of infrastructure to the new elite areas, 22% of the Ministry of Housing's budget for the whole country was spent in just 5 years on these, very, very specific elite areas. So in my research, I looked at 2 such settlements on the northeastern periphery of Cairo, an informal area as Bet El Haggana, and another elite settlement, Tagamma Al Khamis, which consists of private homes, gated communities, and private settlements. And I traced the experiences of residents, particularly dealing with water shortages, which were prominent in the decade prior to the 2011 uprising, but also in the 2010s as well. And it was obvious that there was a clear rationing of water to these informal areas in order to direct more supply to the elite green hills, as the residents called them. So even if informal area residents protested, made demands to the state, chased out water bureaucrats from the area, and basically made noise, these shortages were sometimes cut short and water reestablished, so eliminating that there was actually a shortage. But ultimately, the area still remained off of the priority list of the government. So this purposeful neglect and political choices by the state, in this case, shows the social construction of the notion of scarcity, which may or may not materially exist in the physical sense. But like our colleague from Jordan yesterday was mentioning, the discourse of scarcity remains a very powerful tool in the arsenal of the state to dispossess and disempower certain communities. And it helps and makes the more on political decision on who deserves water and who doesn't. And this leads me to my second claim, which I will quickly talk about, on how this notion of environmental justice that we've been discussing is very closely tied to spatial justice, and how the right to nature is very intertwined with the right to the city as well. So I argue that maybe our definition of environmentalism from below should include urban residents' everyday experiences and struggles with their own definition of the environment. So I argue, and especially on the mainstream literature on movements in Egypt, there is much more of a bourgeois understanding of environmentalism. So to borrow this notion of bourgeois environmentalism from the Indian scholar Amitabh Bhaviskar, this notion shows how elites have co-opted green movements for certain classes and impose their own understanding of what the environment is, which is what Intissar was talking about as well earlier. And there has been a recent, sure. So there's been a recent increase in this type of environmentalism in Egypt. And while I think it's important to understand the environmentalism of the elites, but I would argue for us to include the actions of the urban poor, and not just about some of these classical environmental issues, but also everyday basic needs and struggles that are co-produced in relation to the urban environment. because I think it's important to realize how these localized grassroots forms of contention against environmental damage and against state damage are being undermined because of the particular definition put forward by the middle classes. And I talk about this in more details in a chapter of an edited volume, which I think others might find interesting, and maybe I'll put the link in afterwards, in a book called The Right to Nature, Social Movements, Environmental Justice, and Neoliberal Natures. And I'll quickly just end with this idea that urban political ecology has been useful in dismantling this myth of scarcity and expanding the conceptualization of what are movements and what aren't movements, what constitutes the below, by looking at some of these community-led initiatives and everyday negotiations in both informal areas and elite areas. So this line of scholarship, which is very familiar for practitioners on the ground, by seeing some of these pluralized, fragmented, and for lack of better words, informal systems of gaining access to resources like water, from my research, certain different types of negotiations, like implementing extra legal pipings that communities put in, bribes by businessmen to secure special water quotas, community managed water lines. All of this really breaks down this illusion that the state has a monopoly over distribution, and ultimately the authority of the state ends with its control of the water resources, and the local really takes over at a certain point. So to conclude, we can see a lot of these local interjections as communities reasserting their relationship to nature, which has been severed by the state and different types of technical expertise, and reclaiming citizenship rights in the city. So moving toward more of an environment from below. So thank you for this, and thank you for the opportunity for, I think, a great panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Noura. So we have about 22 minutes exactly for to take questions from the audience. And our first, actually not question, but request is for Noura to please share the title of the book you mentioned, if you can. But please, sure. Feel free to, if you have questions, feel free to write them in the Q&A box. If not, I have many questions for the panelists, and I hope we can have a discussion about this, but I'll give the audience maybe a minute to formulate questions, a minute or two, and if there aren't any, I will start asking mine. Okay, I'll start off with the conversation, and if there are questions, I'll take them. So my question is to collectively to Intissar, Jihad, and Chiara, because you were the people who managed more, who focused more on waste, and then our two other speakers focused more on climate change and water. So my question to you is, in what ways has the environment, in whatever ways it has been defined by municipalities, been instrumentalized politically, especially by political parties? And I know Jihad talked a little bit about this. And in particular, my question is there here a definition of the environment that is different, right? Do we see a different definition, or are they just tagging on the environment as like something to mobilize, like they would mobilize, I don't know, these punctual things they give around elections, you know, like food parcels or whatever? Or is there something particularly different about how the environment becomes instrumentalized? Because it also is amorphous, right? Like there isn't like a packaged thing that is the environment that you can, right? Like it doesn't respect boundaries, it's ambient, it's not an out there thing that you can cut out and distribute. So In your experience, how have political parties in your different contexts instrumentalized this issue?
Yes, if Intissar or Chiara want to go first, okay. Yeah, I didn't speak about that in my presentation, but I've worked in the past on the issue of defining the environment from a local authorities perspective. I'm not speaking exactly about parties, because you see in Lebanon is the local authorities is something of a very hybrid object. We have lots of municipalities. And these have, when we speak about local authorities, we are speaking of very, very different contexts. Some are very capable, have a lot of employees, financial resources, while others are too weak, too small, etc. Some are dominated by parties, and they fill in a clientelist role, but others are, I would say, a more representative of the local community. So it's something in between. So when we're talking about local authorities, you have this whole diversity to keep in mind when we're reflecting on this. However, a few years ago, it's already 8 or 9 years ago, we tried to work on how local authorities understand the idea of environment. What do they put in when we talk about, when they use the word environment, when they use the word sustainable development, because also it's like Intissar and Noura have said, it's trendy, it's used as window dressing. It's about greenwashing somehow. I've seen you know, a festival, which is a normal summer festival they do every year with you know, these Lebanese singers who are invited to come and do shows, and it's called the Environment Festival. It has nothing to do whatsoever with the environment. So everything is greenwashed as environment. So you have this dimension. You have also the lack of, as Khalid said, the idea of what lies behind the environment is something of to be discussed, to be learned, to be built from the ground up. Now, so there's this dimension when we talk about environment, but there's also the real, I would say, dimension when we talk about environment, because local authorities, they are on the front line to issues of water, even though it's not their responsibility in Lebanon. It's not their mandate in Lebanon. It's a mandate of water establishment. However, they are on the front line of this. They have to deal with the issue of water. They have to deal with the issue of solid waste. They have to deal today also with the issue of food, because there's an important transition we are trying to look into today, is an important change that had happened in Lebanon with the economic collapse. You know, this kind of bourgeois environmentalism that used to work as a bubble somehow, and to kind of put away all environmental aspects when they become problematic. Now we have the collapse. So all the traditional tools to put these problems away are no more working. So they have to, municipalities have to deal really with the issue of food. They have to deal really with the issue of using the land, because this is a central issue here, using the land. Dealing with the issue of rent, this kind of change, I believe, it's opening up a new horizon. I don't want to take too much time to give to others space to speak.
Thank you so much, Jihad. Who wants to go? Chiara, Intissar?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk about looking very locally, I think, at the area that I was looking at in Tunis, which is Sidi Hassin. What's interesting, I think, is that political parties have very inconsistent lines on this issue. And so what you find is actually there's a lot of intra-party conflict and different positions on things within parties. So the struggle, the campaign to shut down the landfill in Sidi Hassin actually created a lot of conflict within parties. So you had members of parliament calling for the shutdown, who were against members of parliament from their own party. And so I think it illustrates that political parties don't yet have actually very clear positions or their own understandings of what is environmental policy, what kind of environmental policy they want to have. And I think there are a number of reasons for that, but it is very worrying, I think, that the state institutions that are being led by political officials, by these political parties, do tend to limit the definition of the environment to just hygiene, public hygiene, and not really look more systemically at trying to have a strategy that looks at waste management within the broader system of how to manage that waste and how to transform it. And so I think that the state institutions and the political parties themselves are sort of stuck within the very narrow confines of the existing system, partly due to the fact that they find these international projects, donor projects, that are already in place. And their role is simply to manage the projects, this kind of projectitis that I think Julia mentioned yesterday, rather than actually trying to come up with a national strategy that is able to manage this issue and coming up with innovative policies, reimagining how actually this issue could be looked at. And I think that the existence, the involvement of the private sector has really limited the capacity for state institutions and political parties to reimagine the waste management system, because technically they get paid according to the weight, the amount of waste that they collect and transport, right? And so this means that there is no incentive for them to actually reduce the amount of waste by encouraging, for example, recycling. That's or encouraging.
Very true, yeah.
And so I think the incentives of the system currently don't encourage any political actor to come out and reimagine how the environmental issues around waste management could be managed.
Thank you, Intissar. Chiara?
Yeah, thank you. I don't have much to add. Thank you, Intissar. I completely agree with you, and I'm relieved that we agreed on that, especially for me. In the month I was in Jerba, and being in Jerba means to be in a wealthy area somehow, and in an area which is the focus on tourism activities and has all the lights on, so that there is a lot of interest and stakeholders on that. There wasn't the specialization, there wasn't a development or different conceptualization of environment. It was environment, but not only from political parties that were starting to understand what environmental rights were, but also from entrepreneurs, private actors, and so on, which weren't businesses of waste, but they were making a coalition with them. So there was still this confusion, and I see that it's still the case. And maybe what can do the difference is what we are considering this question, what we are looking at. So if we're looking at the coastal areas, maybe we will see something developing somehow. In the other regions, central, south, and so maybe the history is different, and maybe less occasion to develop and differentiate the definition. But I see more clever and differentiated claims from civil society actors, more knowledge and awareness, but it's not going up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. So I have a couple of questions. I'm going to try to summarize them. So one question for Noura is in relation to this creation of scarcity, the limitation of water resources in informal settlements. Have you noticed how any differences between ethnic and religious communities in terms of how they were affected? And let me just ask all the questions. The other question is to Khalid, is how are environmental associations in Iraq raising public awareness for environmental issues, in particular pollution, salinization of the coastal plain that you have mentioned? And finally, to all panelists, what is the most important agenda item in terms of reforming what municipalities or the local can contribute in shaping environmental policy. So maybe Noura can start, then Khaled, then any of you interested in answering the question of the hard question, basically, of the reform items, right? What do we do about it from the local?
Great, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for the questions. So in terms of the limitation of water resources in informal settlements and how there's been a difference with any of the other ethnic or religious communities been affected. So within Cairo in itself, informal areas are really kind of this mix of different ethnicities, different religions. It's kind of been the space for migrants usually coming in from different cities outside Cairo, as well as recently with refugees from across the region and also the African continent. And I think what I haven't specifically looked at the differences between different types of communities, but my understanding is that in a lot of these informal areas, this is where housing is most most affordable for a lot of these communities and a lot of these different sectors of society. And so it's not very homogeneous areas, but if you want to live in Cairo and if you want to work in Cairo, then this is where you would, this is the first stop that you would usually go to. And a lot of these periphery kind of settlements like Azbit al-Hagana and others, it's definitely a diversity of people. You have even governmental employees living there, and some of the municipal officials that take part in some of these water issues actually live in some of these settlements, and they go through some of the same struggles as well. But I think it's definitely an important question to think about in the future. But right now, the attack against informal areas, in Cairo, with the destruction of a lot of these areas because of the infrastructure that the national government are trying to put in, it's kind of been all-encompassing. So it doesn't really matter how old these settlements are, who lives there, but if it's on the road or it's in the way of some of these, large bridges that have recently become very prominent in the city itself, the government doesn't give any second thoughts to where a lot of these residents are going to be moved out or replaced. On the maybe a quick comment on this idea of the reforming the local role in shaping environmental policy. So in Egypt in particular, again, there's been, I think, more of a centralization of policymaking with the regime. And in terms of environmental policy, there has really been this co-optation by elites and by different parts of the private sector in particular, with, like Jihad was saying, a lot of greenwashing. So recently you see, campaigns to save the Nile, but we're saving the Nile by cleaning it up and making space for, kayaking and water skiing and things like that within Cairo, rather than tackling some of the more systemic issues like the Renaissance Dam and some of these, more damaging actions that are coming up soon, and really trying to engage with that critically. So the local role, there's been kind of this move to empower certain parts of society, including the elites in the private sector, but within some of these more classical terms of the environment, like Intissar was saying, on the hygiene, on cleanliness, on reconnecting through running and biking and that kind of thing. So I think this is what I'll have to say for now on those points.
Thank you, Noura. Khaled?
Thank you, Lana. So before I'm going to just answer a question from Jan Wilkness. So he asked if there's a difference between environmental activism and climate activism in the region, and Middle East and North Africa and Iraq. So specifically, I'm going to talk about Iraq. No, unfortunately, there's not. So as you know well, in Iraq, all is mixed: religion, politics, power, everything's economic. So in this term, in terms of climate change, environmental issues, all is mixed. So we have practically we have environmental activists in Iraq, but we don't have a climate activist. So it's normal to see a person with a very big car 4x4 and talk about environment. So this is really a reality from Iraq and which we faced every day in Iraq. So we don't distinguish between climate activism and environmental activism in one side, and the other side also we don't distinguish between climate and weather. So when we have enough rain, 1 week of rain, so we forget climate change. So this is because of lack of knowledge about environmental challenges and about climate crisis. So this is for, there's another question from Mr. Muhammad. So I'm going to talk in Arabic because the name is Arab. بالعراق بصراحة نعم هناك
In Iraq, to be honest, there is a development when it comes to environmental issues, not climate change issues, but environmental issues. 10 years ago, when I used to be the editor-in-chief of a magazine, of a weekly magazine, and I had prepared a folder on biodiversity. My colleagues used to mock me. What are you talking about? There are other political issues more important. So when I used to tell my colleagues, no, dear colleagues, I am talking about our future, about biodiversity, they used to mock me. However, and now this topic is visible in the media. But as I have mentioned in the beginning of my talk, a small percentage of environmental topics are discussed in the media today. And the last question, also asked by Mr. Muhammad, he talked about salination. And the reason for this salination, was that the reason? Yes, the main reason for salination in Iraq are the following: Iran and Turkey. Iran and Turkey are making our people thirsty. They talk about principles, about Islam, about religion, about morals, about morality, and other principles, but they deprive us of water on a daily basis because the lowering levels of the two rivers in Iraq and these two historic rivers in Iraq originate from Iraq and Turkey. So the lowering levels in these two levels and in the Arab Gulf in Iraq lead to salination of Iraqi lands and destroy agricultural lands in Iraq. That, in addition to the mismanagement of the authorities. The water management institution, the water management during the Babylon Empire used to be better than the current water management of the current state. If we go back to the Hammurabi law, you can be certain that they used to manage water better than we do today. Thank you, Khalid. I would like to thank all of the participants today.
For your contributions, for a lively Q&A. We've actually hit our 90 minutes. So I have to jump actually on another Zoom call, hoping that very soon this Zoom live situation will be over, and then we can all reconvene in a conference face-to-face. Thank you for the Arab Reform Initiative for this wonderful program on environmental politics, for all the organizers. And I will see you hopefully in the future live again soon.